Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Headed into our final segment here of the day, we are going to be talking about specifically the Western Conference playoff race. You know, the Eastern Conference, I feel like we sort of have a good idea of the group of teams that are going to make it. The seeding is sort of seeming to fall into place. The Celtics are the 1 seed, but with a 7-game lead, so it seems like they might be a little bit of a lock for that position. And then from there, it's going to be, some combination of the Cavs, the Bucks, the Knicks, the Sixers, who are a little bit close, but I think that we can just sort of trajectory-wise see, and they have bigger things to worry about in the Eastern Conference, I feel like, than just specifically what seed they are. The Western Conference is a little bit more of a conversation for a couple reasons. First off, the way that it is all so intertwined. I mean, you look at the difference in the East, where the 6 seed from the 10 seed, where the 6-seeded Indiana Pacers are 32 and 25. The Hawks, who are the 10 seed, are 24 and 31, so 7-game lead there. The Brooklyn Nets, who are then the 11 seed, are 10 games behind the Pacers, so it seems like we are pretty much at an understanding of what teams are going to be in the race, where in the Western Conference, things are shaking up a little bit as the Utah Jazz made their trades at the deadline to potentially end up dropping. I mean, they already have dropped outside of the play-in tournament itself, but I still feel like them and the Rockets could potentially sort of cause a little bit of disruption. But, with that being said, we just see how close this conference sort of shakes out, such as last night we saw the Mavericks beat the Suns, and instead they swapped places, so the Mavericks are the 6 seed, the Suns are the 7 seed, and it's interesting because some of these, key teams that we expected coming into the regular season this year are dancing with that play-in spot where, the Timberwolves and the Thunder, they have probably locked themselves away from that conversation, but you have the Mavs, the Suns, the Kings, the Lakers, the Warriors, who, other than the Mavs there, the 4 teams in the play-in tournament right now were all in the playoffs last year. And then you have some frisky other teams that are in that area as well, such as the Mavs, such as the Pelicans. So it starts with, obviously, making the dance, because you can't worry too much about seeding alone, but then it does sort of, especially in the Western Conference, where I feel like you can look at a few of these matchups particularly, and there's a certain history that sort of surrounds them with the Minnesota Timberwolves and the LA Clippers, where it seems as if the Timberwolves have been able to handle the Clippers pretty easily. But if they end up going up against a team that can run a little bit more, that come clutch minutes are a little bit more deliberate in their offense than the Timberwolves are, such as the Nuggets, things could get messy for them there. So just to summarize here, we have the Timberwolves at 1, the Thunder at 2, Clippers at 3, Nuggets at 4, Pelicans at 5, and then Mavs, Suns, Kings, Lakers, Warriors. Who, out of all of these teams, I mean, these are all playoff caliber teams, really, when you look at it. And if you take a couple of these teams and put them in the Eastern Conference, I think that they definitely make it, which is almost a conversation that has surrounded the West versus East for a while. It's weird because I feel like at times we've had some really high caliber contenders in the Eastern Conference, and yet it just always feels like the West has this one-up on the East. So very interesting to see how this plays out. Right now, if I were to pick the 2 teams that fall out of the playoffs here, I would say the Kings, and I guess I'd say the Lakers. And I don't know if that's, again, I think that all of these teams are playoff caliber teams, but it's interesting to see how this is all going to play out. I mean, LeBron James missed the game last night against the Warriors, and I'm sure he'll be back, but I still am not very sold on this Lakers team. I think that losing Jared Vanderbilt, even though I haven't been the biggest fan of him throughout his career, just because I don't think that there is a lot of offensive potential there, he is a very big piece for their defense. And, for some of the game last night, they were playing good defense. Curry killed them. And I think that last night, Steph Curry is an impossible, problem to solve, really, because they were running into a lot of troubles with Steph Curry being the ball handler up top, getting the screen from Draymond or from Looney or even Trace Jackson Davis last night, who had a really good game. The Lakers were playing a lot of drop coverage, having Anthony Davis stand back in the paint and not come up. That's just something you can't do against Steph Curry. And Van Gundy even pointed it out at one point. And then immediately after, they went to the pick and roll again. This time, AD comes back out. Curry makes the pass to Kevon Looney, who makes his way on the drive. Christian Wood contests the shot, but that's where Christian Wood just isn't that impressive of a defender to me, where I think Jared Vanderbilt would have been potentially better suited for it. Maybe I'm just, picking at straws here, but that was, but Looney gets it on the roll there. And like I mentioned, TJD, he had a very big game, especially towards that second quarter as well, even in some of those non-Steph Curry minutes as well. And I just continue to be impressed with the way that they have, after a couple years of very questionable prospect development, they have been able to have some of these guys be real impact players for them, between him and Podziemski. Still not out on Moody, but his efficiency still just really hasn't looked good. But I think it would be the Lakers and the Kings for me on their way out. The Pelicans are a team that I look at, and just based off of maybe the franchise pedigree, you don't expect them to necessarily be there. But at the same time, I think that they do have a ton of talent. I think that it's interesting because last night you had ball handler Zion Williamson actually, initiating stuff with the ball more. And a lot of it is downhill drives and figuring out sort of, what to do from there. A lot of the times we've seen him be pretty dimensional. He always wants to go to that left hand and get the layup. But last night he was facilitating very well as well. And this is an aggressive version of Zion that I can really get behind, because as much, as Zion has sort of hurt himself in terms of public perception, with maybe not coming into seasons quite as in shape as people would have hoped, and some of the off-the-court nonsense that has gone on as well. And I just feel like there is still that bouncy. Zion's still bouncy. I don't know what I'm talking about necessarily that specifically, but there is this version of an athlete who is box office, like he was at Duke. And, it's been Brandon Ingram being the steadying factor for the Pelicans for the majority of the season. But I still do think that Zion can bring this added extra element, especially if he starts to sort of understand his own value and work from there. Last night he finished with 9 assists, and a lot of them just came out of the drive and kick. Very simple, basic concepts, but when you have as much force and as much mass as Zion does with that athletic ability going downhill, there's almost no choice but to collapse the defense in a little bit more. It's a different version, of course. It's not as lengthy. It's not as consistent, especially the conditioning aspect of it. But you look at Giannis, and Giannis by no means is bad at passing and playmaking himself. I'm not saying Zion's better than him either, because we're looking at one game here from Zion. I'm just saying, as a whole here with Zion, he is such a similar impactful guy when he is driving in terms of what it takes for a defense to crash in. If he can sort of get the awareness, the understanding of where the ball needs to go in these instances, he can be a massive problem. We've seen him be a massive problem when it was they knocked off the Clippers, I think, right before the break. I remember watching one of those games and being incredibly impressed about, it was that Clippers game a couple weeks ago. He was just so dominant inside. It's like, just keep that up. And I know it's easier said than done. And I know that at his size, it's obviously, there is a certain level of tough conditioning that comes with that. But get to that point where you do have the conditioning to take over games like that. And I think he can be one of the most entertaining players in the league, especially because his running mate, Brandon Ingram, is somebody who can space out the floor more, can sort of, pull the big guys out, toy with them a little bit, get the perimeter shots, which also, only opens up the inside lane for Zion as well. So I think that it just comes to, conditioning and understanding, and I think that he was the number 1 overall pick for a reason. It's because of what his ceiling was. Baseline, we knew, as long as he is healthy, as long as he is engaged, then he can be a game wrecker. And that's pretty much been what he has been at this point. But we've still had those conditions of him not really taking the game necessarily all too seriously. I think that he definitely felt some sort of accomplishment. Like, I remember, and this is reading too much into a situation, probably, I will acknowledge that firsthand, but I remember seeing a clip, I believe it was from last season, where it was Zion and Anthony Edwards, and they were talking post-game, and Zion, the way that he was speaking to Edwards was like he was this, big-time experienced guy, and he was talking about, this next generation, like, you're gonna be a killer, man, you're gonna be good and all that, and was complimenting him just in a way where it felt like he was kind of the superior. But I think Anthony Edwards was better than Zion even by last season. And it was a really weird dynamic to me, especially because at the time we were talking about Zion had just had a quote come out about him where he doesn't want to play through injuries. If he's not 100% on the court, he doesn't want to be there, which, I mean, you can take that however you want. If it's from a, team perspective of I don't want to hurt my team because I'm not 100%, I can get behind that, but it just feels like with the body of work with Zion here, and I don't know how I got so deep into the Zion conversation necessarily, but it feels like with him there's just a level of, needing to mature, and I feel like I say that about a decent amount of players, and I mean, who am I to really talk about maturity? I am still maturing in my own right as well in everything that I do in life. But we can all acknowledge we need to grow a little bit. And I think that Zion is definitely could be on the path to, real superstardom again. A lot of people have written him off. I'm not out on him. I just want to see him consistently do it on a night-to-night basis. Other than that, though, the Warriors are definitely a potential to not make the playoffs as well, especially when it comes down to they are more than likely going to be in the play-in tournament. They are 4 games out of the 6th seed, which would get them out of that, but nobody wants to face Curry in a 1-game series. And as it's currently slated, we have the Lakers and the Warriors, which was actually what it was during the first season of the play-in tournament. I believe in 2021. It could have been 2020. And we got a classic game between LeBron versus Steph Curry then. And I think that nobody wants to face Curry in a 1-game series. I'm very curious to see how this all plays out with them because last night Klay Thompson really struggled from the floor again, and you can see him getting himself a little bit more involved with the passing and sort of the hockey assist almost, where it's not necessarily him himself making the right pass, but he makes the right pass to the assist and is a little bit, I mean, I still don't think that he has the ability that he used to pre-injuries of him being a lockdown one-on-one defender, but still getting deflections, getting involved off ball. There was an instance, I think it was in the third quarter, where you saw him make a nice play defensively, and at that point, he was 0 for 5 from the field, and you could see him like getting himself pumped up like that. Definitely a lot of frustration with him from his own perspective, knowing, still coming to grasps with the fact that he's not quite the level of player that he was prior, but I do still think that he can be valuable. It's hard to, ding him too much for one game, but it was a little bit of a parade at times when he scored 35 off the bench in their first game, and it's not, quite that simple. This is still something that he is continuing to deal with and the Warriors are growing with as a whole. But on that note, that is all we have for today. Thank you very much for joining us on the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Thank you to Manny for joining us, our first ever guest here on this iteration of the GSMC Sports Podcast. Was a ton of fun. We will be back next week, 2 o'clock as always. Just a reminder to like and follow wherever you may be subscribed to us. Have yourselves a great weekend, and we will see you on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go.